now that we understand the credit demand curve, its basic shape at least, let's try to understand what's going to shift that curve to the left and to the right, which is going to be very important for us to understand how different impacts affect, or different events impact or affect the real interest rate via the credit market. So I've broken it down here into three main ideas or things that could shift the credit demand curve. So one very important one is changes in perceived opportunities for firms. Now, one of the most important components of credit demand is what we've talked about before when we discussed GDP, is business investment. And again, by investment, I don't mean you investing in the sense of buying a stock or a bond. What we mean by business investment is companies buying capital. Okay, so let's say that I own a construction firm, and that construction firm, I'm going to purchase a new dump truck or a new crane, right? Oftentimes, companies won't have enough cash on hand, or they don't want to use that cash on hand to purchase a very large expenditure such as a new crane or dump truck. And so what they'll do is they'll take out a loan. And so how productive companies think that investment will be in the future plays an important role in how much credit they're going to demand at any given real interest rate. So as firms think their business opportunities are going to be improved in the future, their demand for credit is going to increase. So improved or positive outlook demand is going to increase or shift to the right, and vice versa. So if they have a fairly pessimistic view of the future or their future business opportunities, then demand is going to decrease, right? So if I just kind of draw as best I can over here, a credit demand curve, the quantity and the real interest rate, credit demand 1. So a shift to the right or an increase when firms are optimistic about their business opportunities in the future will shift it to the right. For every real interest rate, I want to take out more loans. And we go to the left in that direction if I'm less optimistic about my future business possibilities. So if I happen to think that construction is going to take off in the future, well, I want to invest for that future expansion today by buying a new dump truck or a new crane. And I'm going to do that a lot of times in the credit market. And so demand for credit will fluctuate along with business conditions. And that has an impact on the total amount of investment we see taking place in the economy. Very similarly to that are changes in household preferences or expectations. Now, preferences are the types of things that we like in terms of cars, houses, and those other types of durable goods that we would tend to use credit to purchase. So if we simply change our preferences and that we want more expensive cars, so YouTube is a big deal now, right? You're watching me on YouTube, and maybe you watch a particular YouTube channel and you see that these people on YouTube are driving a fancy Mercedes. And so that may in some way impact you and say, well, I want a Mercedes too. And so in order to purchase the Mercedes, you're going to take out more credit, and that's going to shift the credit demand curve to the right. Expectations work the same way as they do for firms. Right? So if I'm optimistic about the future, so I think I'm going to get a good job or I'm going to continue to get raises at my job, I'm going to be more willing to engage in credit at any given real interest rate. Credit demand will shift to the right. So when I'm optimistic, demand shifts right. Or increases. When I'm pessimistic, it's going to decrease. Same thing with firms. Now, those are all pretty straightforward. So generally speaking, the more positive we are about the future, the more we're going to be willing to take out credit because we think the credit will be beneficial in the future for businesses. And as households, we think that we'll be able to pay it back. Now, The one you may not have expected is changes in government policy. And so how do we think about that? Well, when the government runs a deficit, what that means is they spend more than they take in taxes. So how does the government accomplish that? How can I spend more money than I take in tax revenue? And the answer is the government borrows money. So anytime the government is running a deficit, they are borrowing money to cover the difference, which means they're in the demand for credit. So the government is a major player in credit demand. So to give you an example, recently, so it was technically I think in April, just the end of March 2020, the U.S. government passed this huge coronavirus stimulus bill. So it was about $2 trillion. And if you read it carefully, right, that is all an increase in spending that's not covered by any taxes. So the government is going to borrow $2 trillion in order to send it out to businesses and to households in various forms of stimulus. So the government is borrowing this. And so what that means, when the government increases its borrowing, that's going to shift the credit demand curve to the right. And if the government were to decrease its deficit and borrow less, credit demand would shift to the left. And so one of the important things we're going to have to consider when we think about the impact of these different policies, so the government is going to put a stimulus of $2 trillion into the economy. One aspect we have to consider is how does that affect the credit market? Well, it's going to affect the credit market by increasing demand. And we'll see in equilibrium what that implies for the real interest rates and ultimately how that cycles down through the rest of the economy. Okay, so that's the end of learning objective 2. And what I'd like you to do is to go on to Canvas. And it's actually question on learning objective 2 on Canvas. It will be posted right after this video. See how you do and look at the solution. If you have any points that you don't understand, come back and rewatch these videos.